Asahel Albert North's father, Hiram, was a polygamist. It was rather difficult at times during his childhood. His mother, Priscilla, being the second wife, and her children, had to hide in a room under the haystack when the marshals were in town so his father would not be arrested for having more than one wife. They never knew what was going to happen from one minute to the next. Albert spent his childhood on the family farm at the end of Stringtown in Midway. In 1900, at the age of 20, he went to Byron, Wyoming, and homesteaded 40 acres of land with his brother, Arthur. He was very homesick while in Wyoming. He wrote many letters saying he was coming home for a visit. He always wrote, "I might see you next week, but don't expect me till you see me." He didn't seem to make it home very often due to the lack of transportation. He married a tiny little gal by the name of Mary Stedman from Mill Creek, Utah. She had dark hair and dark brown eyes, and had a very quiet disposition. They settled in Stringtown across from Albert's mother. He worked with his brother, William, for 2 years in the creamery business. After this, he went into the dairy business, buying part of his farm from his father. Here, they raised 5 children to adulthood. Albert operated this farm until 1938, when the state bought most of his land to build Deer Creek Reservoir. He and Mary moved to the McDonald Farm 1 mile north of Heber in February 1938. His dear little wife, Mary, passed away April 21, 1950, of cerebral hemorrhage. Albert was very lonely without her. So he had his, quote, dear little sister, unquote, Edith, move in with him because they were both alone, until he passed away April 16, 1959, due to kidney failure. George was born January 7, 1831, in Sussex, England, to William and Mary Davy Stedman. After a love affair in England fell through, maybe she died, he left England without any relatives, he being the only member of his family, so far as we know, that ever joined the church. On July 9, 1859, he left Florence, Nebraska, with the Captain George Raleigh Handcart Company, with 235 members, 60 handcarts, and 6 wagons. They suffered greatly from hunger while on their journey, and had to kill one of their oxen that was worn out and poor. It was tough eating, but saved them from starving. They arrived in Salt Lake Valley September 2, 1859, where he made his home. George met Elizabeth Wilkins, and after a while they decided to marry. George told Elizabeth he didn't love her, but would marry her and make her a good home. They were married February 18, 1863, by Bishop Andrew Cahoon, and were sealed and endowed in the Endowment House in Salt Lake City in October 1865. They were the parents of 7 children, 3 boys and 4 girls. Their first home was a dugout in a clay bank with a piece of canvas for the door. Later on, George built Elizabeth a nice 2-story adobe house. It was on 39th South and 2nd West in Salt Lake City. George had an odd notion that the best way to bring up a family was to keep them entirely away from other children. The only place they were allowed to go when they were young was to church, where they went with their family and came directly home after. They were not allowed to go to school or have friends outside of the family. However, their education did not suffer, for they were well tutored at home. It was a very lonely time for these children, watching the other kids go to and from school every day. But they respected their father's wishes and did as they were told. George died January 23, 1919, at his home in Mill Creek at the age of 88. Hiram was the 11th child of 14 born to Levi and Arminta Howard North. When he was 12 years old, his family came to Utah with the Robert Wimmer Company and settled in Mill Creek. It was there he met and married his wives, Leah Rebecca Davis and Priscilla Jane Blair, in the Salt Lake Endowment House. The 2 families moved from Mill Creek to Midway in 1871. They owned and operated a small grocery store in Stringtown. Hiram also worked a farm. Hiram played the violin in an orchestra at the dances. He had a great love for his families and taught them the gospel and to live good, honest lives. He was ordained at 70 in the church. In February 1887, Hiram was arrested and charged with unlawful cohabitation. He was sent to prison for 6 months. He was released from prison in August 1887. After being released from prison, he returned home but couldn't legally claim his second wife, so he built a second home close by and continued to love and support both of the families. It was definitely not easy. Levi North, Hiram's father, was born in Carmi, White County, Illinois, on July 17, 1817. At an early age, he learned the trade of a wheelwright and afterwards became a carpenter. He married Armita Howard at the age of 20 on November 16, 1837. Under what circumstance or when the family joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is not known, but from loose notes in the family record book, Levi and Armita North were baptized by W. J. Servod in November 1840. Early in 1841, they moved to Nauvoo, Illinois, where Levi worked as a carpenter on the temple being erected at that time. He was ordained a member of the First 70 in Nauvoo, January 30, 1843. From 1841 to 1852, the family lived in Nauvoo, Illinois, Mount Pisgah, Iowa, and Garden Grove, Iowa. We know from church history that it was during these same years that the main body of the church was moving to these same places, and it is very likely that the North family was moving with them. In this event, it is quite certain that the family was undergoing the same hardships and taking part in the same tremendous task of preparing for the journey into the West. In 1852, the North family went west with the Peter Wimmer Company, and, so far as is known, the trip was made without mishap or serious trouble. They arrived in Salt Lake City in September 1852. They built a 1.5-story frame home. It stood with a background of fruit trees which furnished the family with peaches, apples, and plums. A sparkling stream of clear spring water ran along the edge of the orchard, and just back of the house it ran into the cellar, where it cooled the milk and butter, and then emptied into a pond of fresh water where an abundance of the very best watercress could be found year-round. Levi North, like a number of other men, married a second time. He chose for his second wife Karen Christine Pedersen, whom he married August 15, 1865, in the Endowment House at Salt Lake City, Utah. She was born in Felster, Denmark, November 2, 1845. His two wives were ever willing and eager to share all the responsibilities common in maintaining a home and in rearing a family. They each had 9 children, 16 of whom grew to maturity. Armita lived to be 84 years old, while Karen Christine reached the remarkable age of 93. Since it was unlawful to practice polygamy, it was imperative that a separate home be provided for the wives, and as soon as possible Levi built a new home for Karen Christine. When the Norse came into the Salt Lake Valley, the first settlers had only been here 5 years, so Levi with his oldest sons and the ox team and the heavy wagon helped to build the roads and make the bridges. He possessed a lot of strength and patience. He was of sturdy build, and his disposition was congenial and happy. He was a kind, quiet man, and devoted to his family. He was a true Latter-day Saint, and respected citizen in the community in which he lived. We used to have kerosene lamps and used wood and coal for heat and cooking. We used a box with a wet sack over it for a refrigerator, then an ice box, and then an electric refrigerator and deep freezer. We used to wash clothes on a washboard, then an electric washer and dryer. We traded a cow for our first radio. Then later, after we moved to Heber, we got a TV set and a telephone. We have heard of rockets and satellites and space travel, but never had anything to do with them. We have always had enough to eat and wear, and we've been able to pay off our bills. One time when my sister Zanita's home burned down, we had her and all of her kids move in with us until they were able to find a new home. This was quite a hardship on us, and we used up our 2 years' supply in a month, and all Furl did was cook and wash. There was no room in the house for all of the beds, because we only had a one-bedroom house, so we put all the children out on the lawn to sleep. We were blessed with many of the necessities of life, and have the love and respect of my wife and family. The truthfulness of the modern prophets. Be prayerful and humble. Vaughn W. Julander.
Dad ran a farm in Monroe, Utah for many years. He also plowed the roads in the winter. I remember that was a lot of fun riding around with him in the snow. He was always getting odd jobs to help make things a little better for his family. He never made a lot of money, but I don't remember ever wanting more than we had. They moved to Salt Lake for the summer of 1954 and lived up by Hogle Zoo, where Dad worked with a man training horses. Us kids used to sneak over to the zoo and look at the animals through the fence. When it was time for school to start, we moved to Daniels, where Dad farmed. He also drove the school bus and worked in the school lunch program for the Wasatch School District until he was forced to retire due to his failing health. He had diabetes for about 35 years and had quite a few close calls with it until they were able to get it under control. The doctors didn't think that he would live long with it, but with the care of his little wife, he lived a lot longer and was better off than a lot of other people with diabetes in those days. After retiring, they moved to Bear River, Utah, so they could be closer to Duane, and so they could raise a decent garden. They tried every year in Heber, but the growing season was just too short. My father was a kind and gentle man who was well liked by everyone who knew him. He had a great love for his family. He was quiet and never spoke of his love, but there was never any doubt of it because he showed it in everything he did. He enjoyed his children and grandchildren and spent as much time as he could with them. When we were little, Dad made a lot of our toys. He carved a rocking horse out of a tree when Jerry and Duane were little tots. It was later burned up in a fire in 1967 when the barn burned down, but all of us kids and some of the grandkids were able to use it and had many hours of fun on it. He carved us farm animals for Christmas one year. He loved doing things with his hands and was very talented. Dad loved to go hunting and fishing and to do just about anything outdoors. He had many beautiful horses. I think he would rather be on a horse than just about anything. Vaughn W. Julander died June 16, 1976 in an Ogden hospital of a stroke brought on by his diabetes. We all miss him and regret that many of his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren never got to know him.